Hello, everyone. I'm just checking in. Um, I should remark that I recorded this episode back in May. Wow. This episode would have gone up just a little bit after my birthday, live for our club members. But I never got around to editing it because I took a massive hiatus and vacation and just put this project away for a bit. I should say I haven't stopped making new movie club episodes. I've just been doing it in the background, but I'm finally about to start releasing episodes again. So for the next 3 nights, as you see this, I guess there's only 2 nights left. I'll be releasing the final 3 episodes of Movie Club, and then next week we will do our summer movie series, all back to back to back to back to back. And then season 2 will kick off in earnest the following Friday. I'm very excited about season 2. I'm very, very proud of the work we've done so far. But I just wanted to mention that real quick. Yeah, that's what's happening here. Obviously, I think I seem extremely hopeful here in terms of vaccination and the way that we were moving. And this was long before the Delta variant became a very big deal here in the States. So obviously, there's a lot of optimism here that now seems a bit ignorant. But I just want you to know it wasn't because I was just ignoring a problem. This episode is very, very old. And the intention was to have it up pretty soon after this movie got released, but I got busy taking a break, actually sleeping like a normal person as opposed to busting my butt to get these videos out on time every single time. So yeah, I wanted to address that, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm very, very proud of it. I did a lot of research and a lot of work to prep for it, so hopefully that shows off. You see that in this video. And yeah, hope you enjoy. Cheers. Welcome one and all back to Movie Club. I'm delighted you decided to join us again tonight because we have something extremely special for you. Usually at Movie Club, we don't pick movies that are brand new. That's for obvious reasons. It's tough to cover them, there's not a lot of footage out there, and with this movie, there's not even a physical release for me to pull footage from, which makes it a bit tough. But I loved it enough to cover it and kind of anticipated loving it, or at least really enjoying it. And also, I wanted to use this as a medium to, work through the entire history of the zombie subgenre of horror. And what better time than now? I may have gone overboard in preparation, and I think it's clear that I do care about this subgenre a good bit, especially given that our first ever episode was on George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, which is my favorite movie of all time. So of course I wanted to talk more about it, but I needed an avenue to do that, and I didn't want to recover a movie we've already done so far. At least, not yet. But if I was going to have a birthday movie this year, which sadly this film was only in a couple theaters and not anywhere near me, this probably would have been it, because it was maybe my most anticipated. But I'm going to save all of my commentary on it until we get deeper into the video. So, what can you expect with tonight's video? On tonight's episode, we're going to be covering at least the modern history of the zombie subgenre, my personal love and attachment to its political messaging, and why I think that Zack Snyder actually might be the perfect vessel for carrying the subgenre into its newest evolution. All this and more, as well as plenty of commentary on the actual film, on tonight's episode. I'm your host and curator around these parts, Patrick Smith, and this is Movie Club. Roll the intro, Kyle! Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Movie Club. I'm your host and curator around these parts, and tonight we're going to be digging into the brand new film from Netflix and from director Zack Snyder, Army of the Dead. But before I can tell you that story, I have to tell you this story, which is the history of the subgenre of zombie horror. And that at least our modern conception of zombies, goes all the way back to 1968, with a film that only cost $112,000 to make. And despite immediately falling into the public domain due to some technical issues that caused the movie to not be copyrighted under its brand new title, this film was ubiquitous across all of horror and probably became more popular than it ever would have otherwise due to this mistake. I'm of course talking about George A. Romero's 1968 black and white 4x3 classic, Night of the Living Dead. This movie is not only one of the most important films to, I would argue, horror, and specifically the subgenre of zombie horror, it is also my favorite movie. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think it's a great movie. It's one of the best movies ever made.
It has been established that persons who have recently died have been returning to life and committing acts of murder.
I had a little short story that I had written about zombies, and it was basically a ripoff from Richard Matheson's I Am Legend. So I took the first part of that short story and started to write the screenplay for Night of the Living Dead.
Sure, it has its problems across its short run time, and Barbara isn't the most well-shaded in character, though Romero does fix that in his later Dead trilogy films, as well as the later Dead films overall. Our protagonist with Ben in Night is absolutely fantastic, and whether Romero meant to or not, he invited some brilliant cultural commentary, specifically on the civil rights movement, which was not only just blowing up around the country in the United States at that time, but right here in my hometown of Birmingham, Alabama, was making some major strides forward and seeing some of its most horrific acts against black people perpetrated during that time. And it's probably why that film didn't get released a whole lot of different places, especially in the South. Theaters, due to very, very racist reasons, refused to screen this movie. It's even funnier when you realize that Romero never intended for that to be a thing. When he was making Night of the Living Dead, he didn't think this would be a brilliant commentary on race relations in America at the time. Subtext just happens to only be amplified in that time, and especially now during our Black Lives Matter movement.
They were going after the guy when he was white. So that was not our point.
It's why I cover this film all the way back at the beginning of this series. It's my favorite movie of all time, and I think it deserves a watch. Even if horror isn't typically your cup of tea, this is a brilliant movie. And it's not just important because of its cultural commentary at the time and how it's only gotten more rich in the years since. It's also a brilliantly made movie made by just a couple friends in Philadelphia. These people just believed in a project enough to wear 1,000,002 hats. Romero co-wrote, directed, and edited the original Night of the Living Dead. Actors within the film, playing Harry and Helen Cooper, not only produced the movie, but also worked in the special effects and makeup department. And, you know, Johnny, who is one of the first characters we see in this film, was also a producer. Pretty much everyone you see on screen was doing something other than just acting. And this kind of mentality of everyone, let's get together and make a movie, is what makes Romero such a fascinating director to watch. His very career kind of pushes back on the idea of auteur theory. Not because his films aren't good across his career, but because it's, as they put it, a gang shoot. Let's get together, gang, and make a movie. It is a collaborative process. And it's why so many people loved George Romero. Not just the person, but the filmmaker.
It's been so easy for so many of us who came to Hollywood from Pittsburgh. We've all done quite well. And that's thanks to George. He really mentored, and he may not even have realized he was doing it.
That feels better.
And you think, who is this person who makes these horrible movies? It's this lovely, bright, sweet man that, yeah, you give 110% for because you want to. He's one of the best people I've ever known.
Philadelphians across his original trilogy would just show up for only a single dollar to spend ridiculous amounts of hours in hard-to-get-off makeup to shoot a film with this lovable guy. And everyone that talks about Romero, having worked on his films, clearly loves the man
and admits that they were able to do as many weird and different things and really experiment and challenge him on how the character should be played because he believed in the collaborative process of filmmaking. It's what makes not only the legacy of these films so great, but the films themselves so great. Romero always wanted to make the best product and the best, film overall, and I think he especially accomplished that with this original trilogy. Prior to Romero's 1968 film Night of the Living Dead, zombies were mostly steeped in Haitian voodoo, which Romero would pay tribute to in the tagline for Dawn of the Dead.
When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk here.
This is a line uttered by Ken Foray's character Peter when he's remarking that his grandfather used to participate in Haitian voodoo. This is both Romero referencing the original, roots of this subgenre that he so remarkably shaped up, despite the fact that he only once in this entire original trilogy actually called them zombies. He is responsible for what we think of when we think of zombies now. If you watch The Walking Dead, which I do and I love it, that show doesn't exist without Romero. And I think the deep roots of the political commentary within the zombie film are also an aspect that Romero got right so early on. It is amazing how many things, especially in Night of the Living Dead and in Dawn of the Dead, that Romero already sets up to be the permanent rules for stylistic choices when it comes to zombies. It's kind of amazing. Not only does Romero have this impeccable trilogy that set up all the rules for these types of creatures, rules that some filmmakers would break in interesting and neat ways further on down the line, but he also made what is considered both critically and, by most fans of this subgenre, to be the best zombie film, and that is Dawn of the Dead, which he made a decade after Night. This time, Romero is going it solo, writing, directing, and editing Dawn of the Dead, co-producing it alongside Dario Argento, who is most famous for his giallo films, specifically Suspiria.
Dawn of the Dead is maybe not Romero at his most biting and his most cynical, but it definitely has a lot of his nihilism towards humanity.
And particularly the excesses of what will soon come in the 80s, which is interesting because this film comes out in 1978, and the fact that he's already tapped into that particular culture is so brilliant. And, I think a beautiful critique of our society and how shows how prescient the man is and how well aware he is of the world around him. But Romero also deeply loves people. That's why people loved working with him. Even though his films could be cynical, he couldn't help but have a hope that we, if we chose to work together, could fight for a better tomorrow. And that's the message that is across these original three films. It's when these characters and these people don't work together that everything falls apart. When you get the tragic endings of, especially Night of the Living Dead, the iconic tragic ending there that has only grown more and more deeply troubling every single time I watch it. And I think it's this kind of cultural commentary that makes these films so rich and so worth returning to over and over again. And here's where I get to the complicated part of this essay, because I've already said that Night of the Living Dead is my favorite movie of all time. But I'm going to say something that's going to seem contradictory to this. And that is that Day of the Dead is my favorite of Romero's original Dead trilogy. I haven't quite worked out how that works, but I think overall I like Night of the Living Dead as a film more. But Day of the Dead, I like all the ideas and the way that Romero goes about telling that story and the score and the cinematography and all that stuff. I think it's so unique and it's such a product of all the different elements that went into making it not as grand as Romero originally intended. Romero wanted a huge finish that would be sprawling, and he didn't quite get that with the budget he had. But I think the story we ended up with in Day of the Dead is still equally incredible. While we can always dream of the what-ifs and the alternate universes where Romero got to make this fascinating film, I think this subdued version of the story is equally brilliant. And while it's taken critics and even fans of Romero's work quite a few years to start coming around on this one, I think the tides are turning and people are finally starting to see just how brilliant this film is, and especially how brilliant of a conclusion it is to Romero's original Dead trilogy. In my mind, not only does Day of the Dead have the most interesting philosophical musings of his original trilogy, it has the best villain. I think The cast of characters is rich, and it also has some of the most quotable lines in the entire, franchise. I think about Joseph Pilato's performance and his particular line readings on a near daily basis.
I'm running this monkey farm now, Frankenstein, and I want to know what the fuck you're doing with my time!
It's also, I think, a profound movie that starts towing in the direction that Romero is intending to go. We start to see the humanity even behind these zombies, these flesh-eating creatures that have come back to life, that have been reanimated. We start to see them pretty human, especially thanks to Bub, a zombie that is slowly being trained how to remember parts of its old life, so that way it's less likely to attack. By reverse engineering how these zombies work and by training them to be good little boys and girls, as the scientist says, as we were all effectively tricked into being good little boys and girls through a variety of means, it's the natural evolution here. We just gotta put, for lack of a better term, the fear of God in them. And if we do that, we can survive. Because at this point, it's like 400,000 zombies to every single living person. So the odds of us being able to shoot them all and return to normal life are slim to none. So we have to find a different solution. This seems like a pretty good solution. But the military that is supposed to be protecting this unit of scientists to figure out all of this and effectively provide a solution to solve the problem of the zombies, they're just a tool. And they don't understand all the science jargon, and they really don't care. They just want to do something. And the work that the scientists are doing doesn't often give them that release. And because of that, they're incredibly antagonistic, vile, and evil. And it's the confrontation between the scientists and the villains of the military that are set to protect them that creates this incredible philosophical core that I think makes this film such a fascinating, undersung classic. This is also probably Romero's darkest in the original trilogy. It is the most nihilistic, and I would argue Tom Savini's gore in this film is the most deeply visceral and upsetting. I obviously won't spoil all that for you, but if you want to hear more about this, I sat down with my friend Gavin Slay and we watched through all of the original Romero zombie films. Not just the original trilogy, but all the way through to Survival of the Dead from 2010. And we sat down and we talked about those in depth. So if you want to hear more, including spoiler stuff, you can check out the Post-Credits podcast, not this weekend, but the following weekend. The date will be on the screen right here. Jumping forward to 2005, we have Romero's follow-up, Land of the Dead. I think, honestly, the original trilogy and this film make up a beautiful quadrilogy. There's no, I think, continuity errors if you keep these all as one major story. Or at least no more continuity errors or issues than arise in franchises that last this long, typically. Land of the Dead starts to see these zombies evolve into something different, more intelligent, more capable of planning and strategizing, and incredibly enough, furthering the work from Day of the Dead, developing audiences' empathy for even the zombies and humanizing them. It's fascinating, brilliant work. And there were actual moments where I felt the anguish of a zombie as it was dying. That means something. These things that seem so inhuman all the way back in Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead, Romero has managed across these four movies to develop my own empathy towards these creatures. To see them not just as some inhuman monster, but as an extension of us. This film also has a fantastic cast with John Leguizamo, Asia Argento, Simon Baker, and Dennis Hopper.
Hey everyone, it's me again. I wanted to stop the video here real quick and address something that I didn't think about all that much while filming this episode. I just got through listing off the cast and mentioning that I really liked their performances in this particular film, and Land of the Dead, by the way. And I mentioned Asia Argento in here. Now, originally when I recorded this episode, all I remembered about her was that she had been a part of the Me Too movement, specifically with a lot of allegations against Weinstein and what he had done to her. And I just frankly didn't want to dive into that at the time. It just felt like it was going to be a diversion that would take way too long to deal with. And while I respected her work in that, I just didn't frankly want to deal with it in an episode where that wasn't necessarily the goal, or the themes didn't really, line up to address it head on in a way that didn't feel like it was just a complete diversion. I did, in editing, decide to go and dig in and just remind myself a little bit more about her. And I had completely forgotten that not only had she done allegations against Weinstein, which I totally believe he's a terrible person, and so I believe that what she said he did to her, he did. The problem is that sometimes, and the operative word is sometimes, people who are abused can abuse others. And Argento seems to be in that boat, specifically with a young man by the name of Jimmy Bennett, who, when she was 37, allegedly she sexually assaulted Bennett when he was only 17 years of age, so not even a legal age where they were at when this encounter occurred, because the whole Me Too movement is about it. And I personally have, obviously, I'm using the words allegedly, but that's mostly because I come from I studied journalism in college, so my mindset is until there's, a legal precedent or a ruling from a court of law, allegedly is the safest way to go, so that way you don't get sued. And so I'm going to keep doing that because this is a piece of media that could potentially reach them, though I highly doubt it. So allegedly is my safe word to avoid any legal action. But I do believe Bennett, especially with the fact that she lied about it for quite a bit of time, even as more and more stuff came out. And so she gave a little bit more of like a caveat, like, okay, I did do it, but it was, I wasn't aware that he was, just a bunch of different things. And you can read as much as you want to about it. You can do the research by looking into articles about this situation. And I just personally tend to believe the victims. And so as much as I do believe that Argento was abused by Weinstein, I also believe that she probably abused Jimmy Bennett. And I wanted to take the time to say that I'm not, by any means saying that she gave a great performance. I just completely this was not on my mind at the time. I was not thinking about this, otherwise I would not have even remotely mentioned her alongside the rest of the cast, and would not have remotely suggested that she was delivering a great performance, because, bad people can be talented, and Argento's history is especially messy. But Argento's involvement in Land of the Dead is even more complicated in the fact that, her father, Dario Argento, is actually a previous partner of Romero's. They co-produced Dawn of the Dead back in the 70s. I would imagine that partly contributed to the fact that his daughter ended up working on a later a Dead film from Romero. But obviously that whole situation is extremely complicated in hindsight, knowing all that we know now. And I just wanted to come in here and say I'm not trying to erase any of that. And sorry for getting super serious and dark in this, because typically I like to keep these videos late, but felt that if I didn't address this, it might come across the wrong way, and I want to borrow an old-fashioned phrase, nip that in the bud long before that becomes a potential problem. So hopefully that context helps you understand, and back to a much less serious Patrick, who's having a much better time than I am having to explain this. So let's dive deeper into the later installments of the Dead franchise from Romero, so I don't have to keep talking about this. Back to you, Patrick.
It's maybe some of the best acting in all of Romero's Dead series, and I think this is a continuation of this idea, and it pushes us in the direction of zombies evolving to be something different. Not just mindless walking corpses that turn other people into mindless walking corpses, but actually with some semblance of intelligence. And it sets up the future of zombies, where they seem to strategize or work together to solve a problem. It's interesting that Romero is already pushing zombies in this direction, trying to find new ground to cover. And I think this works brilliantly for a franchise that is now this old. Being developed all the way back in '68, we're now in 2005, and Romero's still finding new ground to cover. And that's fascinating. Now I have to dig into probably my least two favorites of Romero's original Dead series. And that's not to say they're bad. The only complaint I would have about these is, unlike the predecessors here, they're just not scary. They're compelling, and Romero plays around with style a lot, but frankly, other than a couple scares in both films, they're not that scary. but the stories are still so fascinating, I can't help but enjoy them. Sure, I'd love for these movies to scare me a lot more, but I think that Romero's still finding new things to play around with in this world that he's created. I will say that I like to take Diary and Survival as their own duology, separate from the previous movies, because Diary of the Dead jumps back to the beginning of the end of the world, where zombies start to rise, which doesn't really work with a franchise that started all the way back in 1968, and you get the point. But Diary of the Dead is, I would argue, Romero's commentary on, filming horrific acts, filming things like train crashes and things like that. It's accusatory. The people who are documenting these things, that are recording these things, as opposed to helping their friends because they have to document everything, make sure that it's preserved for the future of humanity when that might not come around. It's very damning. And I think that's probably the most interesting part of Diary of the Dead. I will say that the CGI gore in this film is probably my least favorite. It's so weird after 4 great movies of absolutely phenomenal gore being very disappointing in this regard. At this point, I get it because of the era. 2007 wasn't a great time for CGI. It was still in its infancy and hadn't quite been evolved yet. But I do think it also is a product of the style of filmmaking, being cinema verite. It's like a cinema student running around documenting things with a found footage style. It's Romero responding to this found footage genre and being extremely critical of it while also utilizing all of its great assets to create a very real feel, a very real document of what's going on, even if it is a fictitious event. Survival of the Dead returns to a much more cinematic style and also follows up on a character that we meet briefly for like 2.5 minutes in Diary and follows their story. Along with a small unit, they head off to an island that supposedly is peaceful, where there seems to be a rivalry between the two families that have lived on this island for their entire lives. One that wants to keep the zombies around because they're family members, and one that wants to kill them to keep everyone that's still living safe. And here, once again, I think Romero finds a very interesting balance, a very interesting commentary. A dance between these people who are blinded by sentiment, but also might have another underlying motive, and people who want to protect those that are still around and keep them safe. But in the process, do we lose ourselves to that problem? Do we lose ourselves and our souls to how dark of a world that we've created? How dark of a world that we are in, where we have to kill those that we love to stay safe? It's here that I think Romero continues to find new material to ponder over. And it's why I am deeply sad that Romero never got to make his final film. But he did start working on a manuscript, and it seems like we're finally trending in the direction where that will actually be finished and made into a movie, alongside the help of Romero's estate. And I, for one, am extremely excited where the father of the modern zombie will take us next. The kind of political musings and philosophical musings that he'll have in store for us next time. As many films as Romero's made about zombies, it doesn't ever seem like he's tapped out of ideas, at least when it comes to philosophy and the way that we destroy ourselves in documenting these things. It's so brilliant, and it's why I think Romero will stand the test of time, and why his movies will live long past him. Now that I've dived into the entire original Dead series that spawned the modern zombie, I think it'd be helpful to actually talk about tonight's movie. But to do that, we also have to go back to 2005, when our filmmaker from tonight, Zack Snyder, was commissioned to make his first film. From a script by screenwriter James Gunn, who would go on to make the Guardians of the Galaxy series for Marvel, Slither, and many other films, let's just say it's a fascinating film. And especially for a first-time work from a director, Snyder really sets himself up to succeed in the future. And you start to see early elements of his style show up all across this film in interesting ways. Despite being an early filmmaker, it never feels like a first feature. It feels like an experienced craftsman. I know it's controversial. I don't love this as much as the original Dawn of the Dead, but I had an insanely good time with this movie. It picks up the original beats of the movie and mixes and matches them with brand new characters and enough new elements that keeps this something that you don't ever quite know where it's going. And that's a fascinating way to approach a remake. It's a new film with the bare bones of structure from the original behind it. And because of that, it's easy to go, cool, this is in response to Romero's original, but it's also going to forge its own path. And forge its own path, it does, with great characters and fantastic new ideas, and even fast zombies, which, let's be honest, I know some people are on one camp or the other. If you do it well, I'm going to like it. And that's just simple.
Dawn of the Dead came along and I was eager, and I really thought I was like, this I can do. I felt like the tone was really interesting to me, this kind of combination of have fun but don't make fun. Be reverent to the genre, but also push it. The kind of deep dive, Easter eggs, multi-layered. We took a lot of careful time on everything and all the backgrounds and all that stuff. And I was, drawing like crazy to get all the, to storyboard this movie. And at the time, I didn't even share really those storyboards with a lot of the people because I didn't even know that was how you did it.
So Snyder tackled zombies all the way back at the beginning of his career. And since then, he's been making Watchmen, 300, and a bunch of superhero films for DC, including also from this year, Zack Snyder's Justice League, where he finally got to make his original vision of Justice League, which was released back in 2017 and finished by now disgraced director Joss Whedon. I didn't even like the original Justice League. It was too muddled, it was too weird, and it was too disjointed. It felt like two people making a movie, and two people who didn't agree with one another in style. And it's why I didn't like it. But what I did like is Snyder's version of it. Now here I'm going to take a little bit of a diatribe. The Snyder Cut didn't exist. It didn't. It really didn't. If the Snyder Cut existed at all, it was a very, very rough cut of a bunch of animatics, sketches, and drawings and storyboards on top of scenes that had been finished. It never existed in a watchable format. Snyder had to go back to Warner Brothers and ask them for the money to go do reshoots and finish out segments that had not been made prior. Now that being said, if you want to call this the Snyder Cut, that's fine. I don't care. The Snyder Cut, or whatever you want to call this, which I'm going to call by its actual name, Zack Snyder's Justice League, I watched that as a miniseries. My ADD brain can't handle a 4-hour, 2-minute film. So I watched it in segments. And I gotta say, I really enjoyed it. I didn't expect to, but I did. I don't always agree with Snyder's aesthetic choices or even his storytelling methods, and sometimes I really don't jive with the way that he makes movies. But as a human being, I think he's a great guy. He made countless music videos beforehand, including for bands that I really loved. He's also made suicide prevention PSAs for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, especially in light of his daughter's passing. And he has raised countless dollars to go towards that cause, as well as making additional PSAs for cancer research. So at the end of the day, Zack Snyder, based on everything that I hear from the people that work with him, they really like him as a person. He seems like a great guy.
Second card, here we go. Is Zack Snyder nice? No, he's a jackass. I mean, can you say that you are nice? I don't know that people are allowed to say that. I think you'd have to ask someone, but I like to think that I'm relatively nice.
And so after watching and liking Zack Snyder's Justice League on HBO, I was even more excited for Army of the Dead than I already was. I mean, I was going to watch anything Dave Bautista was in anyway, but now I was actually compelled to see what Snyder would do with Army of the Dead. And when I sat down, I gotta say, not only was I immediately satisfied, it surpassed my expectations. And now, without further ado, we're finally gonna dive into tonight's movie. The roots of Army of the Dead also go all the way back to 2005 with Zack Snyder's original Dawn of the Dead remake. He pretty much already had at least an idea, a story for this film back then.
I wrote the story like right after Dawn. I probably wrote the story in 2004, to be honest, is when I came up with the idea. And it kind of had bubbled and sort of It had always been there because I could pitch it really easily. You know, it's like such an obvious thing. It's like, oh, there's a zombie outbreak in Vegas, and they wall the city and they leave the zombies inside.
But for a lot of reasons, and because he was attached to different projects, he just didn't have the time to make it. After finishing his version of Justice League, he finally was opened up to do whatever kind of movie he wanted to, and he propositioned this idea he had for Army of the Dead, and Netflix said, go for it. And go for it, Snyder did. Not only did he co-write and direct this film, he also served as the director of photography here. And for an action film, it's shot a lot unlike I would have ever expected. There's some very interesting visual style, and it feels like we're in the middle of the action all the time. I think Snyder definitely has an eye for the visual. I've always thought that. Going back to his work in the DCEU, I always came away watching his superhero films for Warner Brothers going, that was beautiful. I just wish it had more substance. I wish I attached to it more. Obviously, a lot of people did. A lot of people praised his work in the DCEU. It just didn't always vibe with me. And I wanted it to. But for whatever reason, my personal taste, or I don't know, being a bit of an academic about film, it didn't always work for me. But I'm happy to say that Army of the Dead does. Not only does it continue to forge a new path in evolving what zombies do and how they act, and especially their intelligence and their ability to empathize with one another here, I think Snyder actually might be the perfect vessel for forging a new path in this subgenre. In fact, many people give praise to Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead remake for rejuvenating a franchise that was on its last leg. And luckily so, because we got a couple more Romero films out of that. Not only is it like Ocean's 11 mixed with a fantastic zombie film, we've got a brilliant heist going on at the same time we have some more socio-political messaging that is so unique and brilliant inside a zombie film. I think Snyder knows how to build worlds and leave enough threads to pull on. And there's more than a couple moments in this movie where I'm like, okay, I noticed something right there, and I'm wondering if that's going to be addressed in the cartoon that's coming, or the prequel movie, or whatever. It just, as I was watching this movie, I couldn't wait for more of this world. Which tells you, at least in my opinion, I think this is a great movie. This is maybe the most fun I've had watching a movie this entire year. And that's saying something. Because I've dug into quite a few different franchises that I never had touched before, but Army of the Dead had been high on my list of things that I was incredibly excited for. Usually, when it comes to my birthday, I go to the cinemas with a couple friends and we watch a movie on the big screen. And without a shadow of a doubt, Army of the Dead would have been that movie for me this year. But sadly, you know, everyone's still getting vaccinated. It's not exactly perfectly safe to go back to life right now. But we're moving in that direction, and I'm excited for years to come when we might get a sequel to this movie that actually allows me to do that. And I gotta say, I had so much fun with this movie, and so much fun digging into the entire original Dead series to prepare for it. It helped me appreciate all the little Easter eggs throughout this film that much more, and it proves to me that Snyder actually deeply cares about the material that he's pulling from, and specifically the roots of this subgenre. For every critique I see about this, I could point out a million things from this film that I think proves that he clearly loves this material and isn't just making it because it's fun. Sure, he picked Army of the Dead as his next project after remaking his Justice League in his own image, but he picked this because he wanted a film that he could give his all to and he could do whatever he wanted with. Now that he's not remaking a George Romero classic, he's actually opened up to make whatever he wants and to forge a new path in this subgenre. It's, without a doubt, one of my favorite films of 2021 so far, and I know that's a bold claim, but I had so much fun watching this movie. And I gotta say, it had incredibly deep character moments, and it actually managed to make me cry. There's a lot of stuff in here buried underneath, you know, the fact that it's an action zombie heist movie from director Zack Snyder, that I think if you just want to consume a popcorn flick, you're going to get that in spades. But there's a deeply emotional story that Dave Bautista was initially drawn to, and it's what made him want to do this movie. There's enough subplot stuff here that actually makes this a film that maybe even people who don't always love the horror genre would be interested in. If they like Ocean's 11 and like films with heart, Army of the Dead is that, even if it doesn't appear that from the trailer. It's these kinds of things that make me want to see more of this film. And luckily Netflix has already doubled down on this kind of content. Not only is there already a prequel film that I believe has been filmed and is currently in post-production and could be released as soon as this year, there's also an animated series in the works. And I can't wait to see how they expand the world through this and what they do with all these incredible characters. Because there were so many characters introduced here that I'd love to zoom out and maybe go back in time and see more of their story. But also I'd love to see a sequel to this. Whatever crazy idea that Snyder could cook up and make for us, again, I'd be delighted to see it. Because he sold me on his prowess here. And I gotta say, his work in the zombie subgenre has been absolutely delightful and has been some of the most enriching, experiences I've had this year. I love the zombie subgenre. Like I said, Night of the Living Dead is my favorite movie of all time. But I do think that we can look to Snyder to at least be playing around in this playground of a subgenre, not always taking it seriously, but doing so lovingly, deconstructing the subgenre in interesting ways that I think could forge a new path in it, and definitely makes for some of the most interesting filmmaking I've seen this year. Not only is this film available on Netflix and easy to access for you right now, Netflix has already made a half-hour documentary on the behind the scenes of making this, and as you watch that, you can tell without a shadow of a doubt that clearly everybody who worked on this cared. They wanted to make the best product possible. They wanted to make the best film possible. And to see people clearly resonate and like Zack in the same way that people liked working with Romero makes it seem pretty easy to me to be like, yeah, I think this guy actually might be the person that pushes us forward in this subgenre. And I can't wait to see what he does next. Well, that about wraps up for us this week. I hope you enjoyed this dive into a brand new movie. I know this episode took a little bit longer to make than originally planned, but I had so much fun preparing for this film, and also I had so much fun making this episode. I hope you can tell, and I hope you go and check this out. It's one of the most accessible movies to you right now. You don't even have to leave home, but also it's a really fun time and has a lot of emotional depth that you can go in for too. And I think that's a lot of, at least for me, it was a great experience. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope it's been informative. I hope that you check out our continued discussions on Romero's Dead series in the post-credits podcast, not this weekend, but the following weekend. I deeply love these movies. I think you can tell. But that's it for us this week on Movie Club. We'll be back next week with another episode wrapping up all of our loose storylines and talking about all the movies we covered before we made this video series and getting us back to the very first film that we covered here so that we can end exactly where we begun. I hope you've enjoyed this journey so far. We've got 2 more episodes for you and then we'll go on hiatus, but I've absolutely loved making these videos for you. I can't wait to see where we go next. I'm your host and curator around these parts, Patrick Smith, and this has been Movie Club. I'll see you all next week.
A lot of people often compare you to Hitchcock, but you don't buy that. How come?
They have some nerve.
When the film opened at the Rivoli, we saw this crowd down Times Square. And I'm going, gee, what movie is that for? And it was for us.